Hi, welcome back everyone to another episode with Peter Ingle and myself, Mihai Algiu. And today we are going to tackle something that somehow is very dear to me. It is from Gurdjieff in his masterpiece, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. There are some important teachings, the five being Obligolnian Strivings. Gurdjieff was inventing certain words or using different words from different languages. I'm not sure what Obligolnian means, but it links to semantically to the obligatory. That chapter, those five being strivings, are from a chapter where Beelzebub, or Gurdjieff through Beelzebub, this wise alien being that has been observing humanity for thousands and thousands of years and being dumbfounded by how the human beings are living so unconsciously and creating so much suffering for themselves, and somehow they lost their way. And part of Beelzebub's task was to observe these peculiar beings, us, the humans. And then the whole book is some kind of impartial criticism of a life of man, as if talking to his grandson, who was very curious, and asked him, "Grandpa, tell me more about those peculiar beings and all of that." So these five being strivings that we're going to talk about, apparently according to Gurdjieff, from time to time, our common father or the creator, the maker, are living, they will periodically send certain messengers of God, some kind of highly developed beings that will take the form of a human being and bring some teaching. And Gurdjieff mentions several of them, like Jesus and Buddha and many others. Anyway, and then he mentions about this sage, Ashiata Shemash. So these five strivings were the teaching of Ashiata Shemash. And we are going to go into them. But when I read them and tried to contemplate on them, I was struck in a sense that what was meaningful to me is that it's almost like they represent the manual of living, like a manual of living a conscious life, purposeful life, not wasting one's life. And I often pondered on how it's so mysterious here. We come here and somehow I felt like it's almost unfair and tricky. We come here to evolve, but then we are clean slate. We forget everything and we don't know why we are here, what we are, and what's the point of life. Gurdjieff almost, to me, gave this like the recipe to not waste one's life. So that's why I would almost call them principles of conscious living, these five being strivings. So it doesn't say the five strivings or hey, these are the five things to do. It say the five being strivings. So it doesn't talk about behavior. It's not about how to be a good man, how to be a loving man, how to follow some morality, It's about the strivings of our being, of our spirit. First striving is to have in their ordinary being existence everything satisfying and really necessary for their planetary body. To have in their ordinary being existence everything satisfying and really necessary for their planetary body. So to me here this implies somehow its first striving is also to really survive. Even if life is hard, even if we are sad, even if we are totally depressed, it's important to stay in the game. It's a duty and a responsibility to live, to stay alive. But then there's the other element here, to have in their ordinary being existence everything satisfying and really necessary for the planetary body. So I believe, and Peter, you can talk about this, but our instinctive center is doing that. Anyway, is designed to do that. A healthy instinctive center is designed to to keep the body alive and to have food, shelter, water, some degree of comfort and safety and whatever we need. However, I think in our modern age, and I think it's a weakness of humanity, is that we forgot why we are here, and then we are going for having more comforts. And he talks about what's really necessary, what's satisfying and necessary for the planetary body. But that's not the ultimate aim. It's hard to go into the deep spiritual work if we are on the street, or if we are in a warfare, or if we are really hungry. It's really hard. It's not impossible. There are cases like that, but that will be some of my thoughts on the first striving. Anything is evoked in you, Peter, on this?
I was looking at these not so much as guidelines for humanity in general, but as guidelines, a framework for thinking about what is required for someone who's interested in waking up. What caught my attention were the same words, satisfying and necessary. I equate this, of course, because of my familiarity with the fourth way, I equate this with the idea of being what is called a good householder, meaning to have the time and the energy for this internal work, this internal striving for conscious awareness. You have to have your life in fairly good order. You have to have a necessary means of supporting yourself. You have to have a necessary balance in your life. At the same time, this word satisfying, to me, what came to mind is essence. One's essence also needs to be kind of healthy. And it needs to be being nourished enough, not necessarily completely, not having this wonderful, blissful essence of life, but your essence is being fed. It's not being defeated. So it's able, because essence is the seed of awareness in us. It's the seed case, rather. It's how the fourth way presents it. We need to have a kind of a stable life in terms of having the time and the energy to be able to devote ourselves to more serious inner work. And then our essence, this inner part of us that's more true, more simple, more our real nature, has to be kept. Well, nourished is the word that comes to mind. Again, that this isn't just for humanity in general, but for people interested in internal evolution, enlightenment, spiritual work.
Yeah, I like how you put it like that. Yeah. We are mammalians. So we are mammalians, and most mammals are pack animals. So some kind of basic emotional needs, some kind of friends, meaningful friendship, connections. I mean, for us in the work, it's like second line, meaningful connections in the work, where we are other human beings interested in the work, but we hang out, we are enjoying ourselves. That's important. And I know people that are interested in conscious evolution, but for some various reason they are very isolated, and it's a big suffering in that. It's a big suffering, and I think that's part of the work to somehow see how come they ended up there and to come out of that. Also intellectual, so intellectual, emotional, our essence encompasses all the centers. Well, let's go on, because we are staying a lot with the first one, which is the simplest one. The second striving is to have a constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. To have a constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. So to me, this is about like, hey, here, now that the body has what it needs and is overall stable and comfortable, now do what you came here to do, to wake up, go through the process, various stages of conscious evolution. And it doesn't say self-improvement, constant and unflagging instinctive need. The word self-perfection may allude to self-improvement and becoming a more better person, a better ego, a better, more developed, more polished, more healed ego, according to the fourth way, according to Gurdjieff. And basically, as we come here, we have this choice to remain as we are, unfinished. We have a house of 4 stories and we only live in the basement. So the perfecting, from self-perfecting from the point of view of being, is to wake up more and more, become more conscious, die a lot of false stuff, to die our pettiness, our vanity, our arrogance, our self-pity, our reactivity, our enslaved to other people's opinion, our being distracted. All of this, a lot needs to die. Some false imaginary self needs to die in order for something to be reborn. And also I like this, the unflagging instinctive need, constant unflagging instinctive need. And I like how he puts the word instinctive, because usually the word instinctive is associated with the instinctive center. But
I see too that word instinctive, meaning in the sense of deeply ingrained. What I read into this from the fourth way perspective is the idea of a magnetic center. And I see that these strivings, now that we're talking about it, I'm seeing they build one on top of the next. Each one builds on the ones below it. And so you have to have a stable kind of existence. You have to have time and money and the right energy in order to be able to have this ingrained desire that draws you, it pulls you toward more and more often, with more and more intensity, toward this idea of enlightenment, awakening, self-perfection, which is what he's, to me, that's what that term implies. Doesn't mean like you said, not that we're becoming more perfect, but this true self-perfection. And that a healthy, stable, committed, desirous, for lack of a better word, magnetic center, that part in us that is drawn, because there are many parts of our being that are not. Many parts of our being are drawn just to ordinary existence, survival, reputation, fame, possessions, and so on. Also, what this is saying is, it doesn't mean a magnetic center is not one thing. There are many different kinds and different degrees of magnetic center. It means you can have a passing interest in spiritual ideas, and that's not enough. What he's saying, it has to be constant and unflagging. You have to be really wanting and be ready to be committed to, where in such a way that your interest in your pursuit of self-perfection, of which is awakening, has to become more and more and more the priority. According to his description, it's in those in whom it becomes more and more a priority in their life, that they now are actualizing, living these first 2 strivings. And again, with the second one building on the first is the foundation. The second is something that's able to now build itself and increase itself on top of that foundation of the first striving. A healthy and ever blooming, ever blossoming magnetic center.
also, this reminds me a little bit early Christian, this idea of conversion, right? Actually, it is not like, it is not taken in that religious mechanical way, but it's more like all my energies are now going towards that. It's a lasering on the aim, constant, unflagging, instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being. And I'm sure that Peter and some of the people listening to this, and they are starting to sense this, like, if I'm not engaged in conscious work somehow, if I'm getting distracted for some time, something feels off. There's something not right. That's a good sign. It's hard to keep sleeping. It's a turning point when sleeping, being spiritually asleep and living a mechanical life, it starts to be painful. It starts to be disturbing, and it's something that reminds us, something else reminds us and drives us. Somehow that's already a very good point.
And it's interesting, he put in this word need.
Yeah.
So it's like that. It's not even that it's more and more of a desire. It's more and more of a need. It's a fundamental need in your being
Yes.
to pursue self-perfection in the inner sense.
Let's go to the third striving, which is interesting. This builds on top of the other. So we have now the constant need for working on oneself, and the third one comes. The third striving is the conscious striving to know ever more and more concerning the laws of world creation and world maintenance. So the conscious striving to know even more and more concerning the laws of world creation and world maintenance. I haven't spent a lot of time contemplating on that, but to me this alludes to just in the fourth way. It's important to combine the study of cosmology, the study of psychology, the inner world, with the study of cosmology, seeming the outer world. So somehow, in order to be going forward on the path in a good way, to understand the laws, the divine laws operating here. And I'm not talking about just, gravity or centrifugal force and all of that, which are also divine laws at the level of the cosmos, but the law of three, the fourth way, the three forces combining in everything that's happening, the law of seven, the octaves. So the conscious striving to know ever more and more concerning the laws of world creation, world maintenance. Also this, now going towards non-duality. Everything, the computer, my body, my thoughts, my feelings, the mountain, are all modulations of the same reality. This is important knowledge to first get it intellectually, contemplate on it intellectually, and then through becoming more conscious and purifying oneself from the false, it will be revealed more intuitively or in our experience, the truth of these laws.
I resonated with what you said in the beginning, the law, these higher laws, these laws of the universe, the law of seven, the law of three in particular, and this idea of as above, so below. It's not enough just to study ourselves, but to turn outward, to look outward, and to study how things are actually operating according to universal laws. It's interesting, creation and maintenance. And I hadn't really thought about it like that before, but you could almost say the law of three is about the creation of things, everything that happens, everything that manifests, according to the fourth way. And you see this in Eastern teachings too. They talk about the three forces, that this combination of three forces is behind everything. Nothing can exist without three forces coming into play. And that's how things are, you could say, created. And then how do they continue? How do they change? How are they maintained? Are they kept going? And that really is the law of seven. Gurdjieff in veiled language referencing these higher laws and this idea of, he would say, man can learn about himself by studying the universe. And he can learn about the universe by studying himself. Because the laws are the same. They just operate differently on different scales or as in different worlds. And it's interesting, that word is here, world. And it could even be more and more concerning the laws of worlds creation and worlds maintenance inside of us and outside of us.
We have, I believe, a few videos on the cosmology and the law of three, law of seven. So you can totally look into that. Also, another idea is that in the fourth way, this idea there are seven cosmoses within each other. And so this body, from one angle, is a cosmos in itself, so the microcosmos. And then at the level of the body, the same laws operate everywhere. So just understanding how every cell, the cell in my lungs, the cell in my brain, and all of this, they are working perfectly in harmony, and they're all part of a body. The same way, all us humans and are all kind of cells in a body of humanity, and they are part of a bigger body. Although we don't see that, we feel like we are separate, and this guy's there, and like, I'm me, and they are them. But you can totally see how at the level of the cell, it's not a separate cell. I mean, it's a conceptualization. It's a whole happening. It's a happening, basically. And so understanding or contemplating on these 7 levels of the universe helps. And God created, in the Bible, they say God, and Gurdjieff quotes that, God created man in his image. Therefore, man is a miniature God. But this is the man that's going to go through perfecting oneself from the point of view of being. That's what Gurdjieff was saying. Then you can, if one finishes oneself and fulfills this divine potential, then one can call oneself true a man, not a man in quotation marks. That's what Gurdjieff was saying. And the last piece on that is that I was recommending actually to people in my group to watch some of these cosmos videos. There are all of these documentaries and amazing TV series on the nature of the universe and the cosmos and the solar system. Rather than watching all the time silly stuff, just entertainment, just be exposed to that information. It really is like, whoa, it opens the scale and relativity. It opens the mind from such a small vista. And
it's interesting you say that. The image that came to my mind as you said it, imagine a cell in our body watching a documentary about our body and trying to understand its place in that on a very small TV set.
So the 4th striving, which was the most kind of esoteric in some way and kind of bewildering, for the striving from the beginning of their existence to pay for their arising and their individuality as quickly as possible, in order afterwards to be free to lighten as much as possible the sorrow of our common Father. So the striving for human beings, from the very beginning of their existence, to pay for their arising and their individuality as quickly as possible, in order afterwards to be free to lighten as much as possible the sorrow of our common Father. So here, the first part, how I take it, it's a lot of investment. A lot of investment has been put into this body, mind, consciousness to arise on this planet. And what does it mean to pay for the gift of life and for having gotten this seeming individuality? Because only then one can lighten the sorrow of our common Father. And somewhere else I heard this, and to be helpful to God, basically to lighten the sorrow, to be helpful to our common Father. And let's put this lighten the sorrow aside, because that's really esoteric, we'll get into it. But to be helpful, one cannot be helpful to anybody, including oneself, if one is unconscious. If one is asleep, lost in identification all day, every day, and churning on painful illusions and creating suffering for oneself and suffering for others. And so the way to be helpful and the way to pay for the gift of life is to do the second striving, basically. To have a constant and unflagging instinctive need for self-perfection in the sense of being, to work on oneself and to go through various stages of consciousness, spiritual evolution. And then, as quickly as possible, it's very interesting, don't waste time. Don't waste time, use time well. It's so short, our life here. Basically, Gurdjieff was saying in Beelzebub that only a man who has attained this level of self-awareness and even objective consciousness, then they can be useful in the bigger picture. Yeah, otherwise we are lost children creating havoc in this part with, in order afterwards to be free, to lighten as much as possible the sorrow of our common Father. If I are wrapped up in our own unconsciousness, first of all, we are not free, we are not available. This is mysterious. So to lighten the sorrow of God. And here we need to look at God not as some old Jew with a big beard with a comb in his pocket, as Gurdjieff would say. That's not the out there, some God out there. Actually, Gurdjieff saying that imaginary God that needs to be destroyed. So what's the sorrow of our Father, sorrow of God? If God is the totality, it's the conscious totality. Just like in this body, there are all of these tissues and organs and cells and neurons and electrons, but they are all part of a conscious totality. In the same way, all the planets, all the dimensions, all the galaxies, they are part of a bigger reality. And the totality of it, that is the reality, the body of God. And God, consciousness, is aware of everything. And think about our planet here. Basically, people are unconscious. As miniature God, they're unconscious, and they are suffering tremendously. And they are creating suffering to each other. And God, reality, consciousness, is feeling all of this. So that's the sorrow. That's the sorrow of our common Father.
I was starting to read this backwards from the point of view of, well, first of all, what is this sorrow of this absolute consciousness, and how can we lighten it? In order to be able to do that, we have to be free, he is saying, as you pointed out. So what does that mean, to be free? That means consciousness is now free. Consciousness is now free from the body and free from the mind, and with any and all preoccupation and or identification with them. It's now free, and in being free, it can lighten this, whatever this sorrow is, which we can talk more about. But in order to be free, a payment has to happen. And a payment is nothing more than a form of exchange. In the simplest terms, you exchange one thing for another. And in the fourth way, of course, the principle is there are two forms of payment, two forms of exchange. One is you sacrifice, you exchange your imaginary suffering, which is based on your imaginary idea of yourself, which is most of our suffering that torments us daily. Of course, there are people who are suffering extremely in real ways daily, but in general, humanity suffers from a lot of unnecessary suffering due to the ego. And so by sacrificing this, and in turn sacrificing the ego, now there is room for this seed case of essence and possibility of awakening, which is referred to in the first several strivings, to now be liberated. The other form of payment is through real suffering, enduring real suffering and transforming it, and understanding what that means. Because what it means is that we don't transform the real suffering in our lives. Consciousness is transformed by transcending the suffering, by not identifying with, not clinging to the suffering and the feeling of I, who is suffering. And to strive from the beginning of their existence, to me this almost feels like existence is being used in a kind of a tricky way here, meaning once you begin to realize your existence, because we don't as a little baby and into teenagehood and sometimes into young adulthood and sometimes even later, a person may not realize their own existence, this incredible phenomenon, made in man, made in the image of God. We have this possibility. And it's because we're here in this form, in this seed case, this container that has this potential for awareness to realize itself through. From the moment you start to realize that, to understand now this exchange has to start happening for it to be actualized. And this means in the fourth way, of course, it's sacrificing your imagination, your identification, your inner considering, lying, talking, the expression of negative emotion, all these things. These are forms of sacrifice. They're forms of payment. They are forms of exchange. We're exchanging the lower for the higher. We're giving up lower worlds. And it's interesting, this follows this idea of understanding how the worlds operate in us. Then the result, of course, is this lightening. So, but first we're free. Consciousness is now free. And the image came to me a little while ago when you were talking, Mihai. Imagine this absolute consciousness and imagine it as light. as the source of all light in the entire universe, what the fourth way calls the ray of creation. And imagine it now somehow manifests a proliferation of light bulbs throughout the universe. And they all have the possibility of lighting, but it's only a possibility. And so this awareness watches all of these light bulbs go out from itself, from its source, with this potential. What is it most concerned about? And what would lighten its sorrow? Sorrow is such an interesting word here to me, because it's not suffering. I can't say to you this is absolutely true, but I don't believe that this absolute source is suffering in the sense that we think of suffering. But sorrow I can actually relate to more easily. And yes, it has sent out these seeds, these light bulbs in my analogy, in the kind of the hope and the possibility they will light. They will turn on and they will begin to generate light, and it will be the same light at the source. And so imagine you're this absolute source, and you see, it's like the body seeing one of the cells watch on a very small TV a documentary about its existence inside the body. And now you see this light bulb turn on. You see one of the many light bulbs start to glow. First it turns on, maybe it flickers, and then it turns on, it stays on, and then it starts to glow. And now its light is the thing. It's not the light bulb. It's the light that it's generating that lightens the sorrow of this absolute consciousness. And in this sense, an argument could be made that this absolute, this common Father, is not even concerned about our suffering. That in the end, the suffering we experience in the human form it's just as Uspensky said, it's just a fermentation. There's nothing personal about it. This God is not doing anything to anyone for any reason. It's not a personal thing. Our whole sense of personal it is an illusion. It's a projection in the mind. And the suffering doesn't matter. This is what's also, it doesn't matter how you suffer, the form of suffering, the length of suffering, the kind of, it doesn't matter. It's just the grist for the mill. And the intention is, the hope is that it will yield more consciousness. And it will be a catalyst for the transformation of consciousness, for more light bulbs to turn on. This idea that Christ came onto the earth to relieve our suffering, to me, this is so misunderstood. And it's in this context that I'm speaking that it's misunderstood. This common Father, this one source of unified consciousness in the universe, and we don't even understand what the universe is and how vast it is and what all the things going on in the universe, but its joy is consciousness. And you can know this because in yourself, and this goes back to this unflagging need. The more it moves in the direction of its source, the more joy, you could call it experiences simply from the consciousness of itself being conscious. And it's not human joy, although it can infiltrate into and affect human joy by lightening all the unnecessary suffering. But there's so much packed into this one. Striving from the beginning, paying, arising, and this individuality. Now this light bulb is recognizing itself. It's not individuality in the sense of me, personal, but now this light bulb is turning on and then starting to glow, generate light, and that lightens. Somehow, the image comes to my mind of this absolute consciousness is weighed by having to carry all the light. And now suddenly some of these light bulbs are starting to bear that load. Mm-hmm. They're bearing the load of the light. They're sharing the generative power of the light. Mm-hmm. And this is light, literally lighting up and lightening this common Father. And, I'll just finish by saying it reminds me of the book, The Cloud of Unknowing. In that book, there's another book. In that book, they're talking about prayer and what does it mean to pray. And the ultimate idea of prayer, which is praying to this common Father, is not asking for anything. It is rendering reverent affection for God as He is. That's it. That's the ultimate prayer. Rendering reverent affection for God as He is. Don't give me anything. Help me, save me, comfort me. No, it's not about me. And it's akin to a tree producing its best fruit and then holding up this piece of fruit to God and offering it. It's again an exchange. It's like a sacrifice, a yielding and offering to God my best, highest, purest fruit, which in the case of a human being is consciousness. And now, in effect, what this is the consciousness in us offering itself, giving itself back to its source. And this is, we're sacrificing. This is like a sacrifice. And it's interesting to me, one of the last words purported by Christ on the cross was, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit." And what's that saying is this human being, this consciousness, this was saying, this consciousness in me doesn't even belong to me. I'm now entrusting, I'm commending it to you, I'm giving it back. This is a very high, profound, deep understanding about what consciousness is, what awakening means, where it goes, where it leads to. We're not just awakening for our own sake, to be more present to our life. Although that's it, that's obviously a part of it, but there's more. Where's this all going? It's this reunion, rejoining with the source. A lot of this is implied here in this fourth striving. Considered, and this idea of the sorrow of our common fathers, what has touched me the most in examining these. What does that mean? And to lighten the sorrow as much as possible, meaning there are degrees to which the consciousness in different people can glow and generate light, cast light. But somehow, in some other dimension, this common father seeing the light bulbs starting to flicker and then turn on. Just like when you plug in Christmas lights, and some of them come on and some of them don't. But and what a pleasure it is when they come on. It's a weak comparison, but you get the idea.
All right, Peter. So let's go. We have the final striving now. The fifth striving. The striving always to assist the most rapid perfecting of other beings, both those similar to oneself and those of other forms, up to the degree of the sacred martphotai, that is, up to the degree of self-individuality. I'll say it again. The striving always to assist the most rapid perfecting of other beings, both those similar to oneself and those of other forms, up to the degree of the sacred martphotai, that is, up to the degree of self-individuality. You want to start with this, Peter?
As we were mentioning during our break, this one is so interesting. It has so many layers to it, especially this phrase, both those similar to oneself and those of other forms. And then up to the degree of self-individuality. What that implies to me is no one can wake somebody else up. Nobody can actually make someone more conscious. The consciousness in the other person has to realize itself. And then from there, it can become more conscious. It can become more self-revelatory to itself. But we can support that arising in other people. But that's maybe as far as we can take it, at least at this point, while we're still in human form. We can only help, assist, foster, reinforce, promote, encourage. That's already huge, of course. Of course, it's quite a challenge always to assist the most rapid perfecting. That means never missing an opportunity, being as conscious as possible and being alert to helping, being available. But what I find interesting about this kind of relates to the fourth striving. It's not saying help relieve the suffering of other people. A lot of emphasis is often put, let's help relieve the suffering of others. But what this is saying, help reinforce the awakening, the conscious awakening of others. That's very different. Those are kind of going in different directions. Granted, as you mentioned in your practice as a psychotherapist, you are often helping relieve the suffering and helping people heal. And then that in itself is a part and parcel of helping foster the awakening in them, the self-realization in them. Striving, as I also mentioned during the break, the third striving is the only one that mentions, or it's the first time the word conscious is mentioned, a conscious striving, which implies by the time you arrive at this third striving, you are conscious or approaching consciousness. And now you're in a position to work on these last three strivings in a conscious way, not in a mental way, not as a theory, not as a point of view, not as just trying to be a good person, but from the perspective of consciousness, which is very different. We're now talking another dimension is at play here, is involved, is an influence. Now there's an influence coming from consciousness itself with regard to these. It's pretty obvious on a simple level, help others awaken to the fullest extent that you can. Help them reach the fullest extent of awakening they can at this level. To me, I think you could spend a long time just sitting with this fifth striving, with all of them really, but the fifth one, a long time and pondering it and letting it, and I think so what happened to me is new aspects of it started to kind of reveal themselves in my thoughts. And this is quite, knowing Gurdjieff, of course, even though this book, Beelzebub's Tale, it can seem like a lot of blather at times, and he writes sentences that are 2 paragraphs long, and he invents words, and he's wandering, and he has these long thoughts, and it's challenging to stay with him. And so there's a lot there, but at the same time, it's all very carefully composed, and the words are chosen. And it's also interesting, he didn't write this in English, as I understand it. He had help from Orage and some other people to put it in its final shape where it was comprehensible. And but he wanted it to be veiled. He wanted this language he wanted it to veil the underlying esoteric truth. You could say it's sort of a veiled rendition of the fourth way system, but it's that and more, I believe. And so this, again, just to say, here we have one long sentence, which he was very fond of. He'd pack a lot of ideas into one sentence. He wouldn't, as a good writer, break them into smaller sentences for the benefit of the reader.
From one angle, these 5 strivings is one of the most clearest and short sentences from the book, and they really go
yes,
1 page or 2 pages long, and I sat with it quite some time, but I'm surprised just having a talk on this with you, how it unpacks more and more. As he was writing this towards the end of his life, because he felt like he doesn't have much time left, and it will be more efficient to put all his teaching into a form of a book. And the idea was that he stopped groups, he stopped seeing almost anybody for a long time, like 6 years or so. And then he will have people read this. He will read this chapter and will ask them, or in the early stages of the book, when it wasn't before it was published, they'll ask him, what did you understand? And the students will say what they understood. And Gurdjieff was like, okay, let me bury this bone a little deeper. So he really wanted to then make it more veiled, in some way, which is so different than what's happening today on the internet. It's like everything, the ultimate, all the sages and everything is put out there, and a lot of explanation. And from one angle, what I am doing, I'm like breaking it down, explaining it, and hundreds of videos, and sometimes I'm like, man, it's like as if I started to feel a little the need to let's make it less so as if I'm giving half-chewed strawberries in people's mouth. And I think it's I know you wanted to people to take more self-responsibility for this, to be more active on their own rather than be spoon-fed.
Well, and too, before we even started these conversations on the internet like this, in YouTube, posting all this, putting it all out there, I was very reluctant because, of course, I came from the tradition of a school is a closed circle. And these ideas are not meant for everyone, just as these 5 strivings imply. You have to have a foundation and you have to build something on top of that. And then you have to add something on top of that in order to be able to do some more of these things. And it's not that you just throw it out there, because that's what's happening now. Everything's being thrown out there. And that's why I felt, well, maybe it's time. I gave it a lot of consideration, and I was quite hesitant. And I'm still not fully understanding why this is happening, why so much knowledge of really all of history, this degree and this quantity of esoteric knowledge is being released into the world. It's a very big moment. Yes, and so he didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted people to work. Only if you had already met a couple of these strivings, for example, were you ready to dig. Like he said, a conscious striving to learn more about world creation and world maintenance. And in a way, his book is about that. And you have to dig through this book to get the nuggets. The nuggets are there. The whole thing is not it. There's a lot hidden inside other things that have an esoteric truth behind them.
Duality. So yeah, I totally agree with you that it is about once one, and that's important, once one has accumulated something in oneself, once one has navigated the territory of being more conscious, then to help others, to guide them on the territory, help them to be more conscious. It's tricky because they could be one can be unconscious in trying to help others for wrong reasons, to so the ego is trying to get juice from being a healer, or trying to be special as a teacher, or trying to so it can be done from very wrong reasons, and there will be total spiritual sleep. So it's important to be honest with oneself. And another piece here is that one needs to be discerning. Yeah, maybe it inspires some people to read.
And to ponder these 5 things. This isn't just a cursory list. These are not simple, ordinary statements. This is kind of extraordinary, really, what he put into words here.
Yeah.